Well, Geddie is the EU Director of Advocacy at Amnesty International. She joins us from Brussels, where she earlier followed the voting taking place at the European Parliament. Thanks for joining us. What do you make of this overhaul of migration policies?
So today the Pact passed, but among strong divisions. And in Amnesty's view, this Pact is going to worsen the situation and create much more suffering for people and more chaos at the border. And in our view, Europe clearly needs a better standard. It was a really interesting day today in Brussels. A lot of speculation right up to the vote about whether or not it would pass. Inside the Parliament, there was an exceptionally high presence of senior European Commission officials and debates going on right up to the vote. The clear message they were giving to the Parliament was it was better this pact than no pact. We saw protests in the Parliament. Outside in the square in front of the European Parliament, many protesters were gathered with banners calling on MEPs to reject the proposal, and chants of shame on you could clearly be heard. So the divisions were clear, and the mood in Brussels has really shifted from a celebration of this agreement from some months back to now a real concern about what exactly this pact will mean. For Amnesty and many others, this is not a pact which will serve the people of Europe or serve people arriving to Europe. It will codify the status quo, weaken the right to asylum, normalise immigration detention, including for children and families, increase racial profiling, and we think put people at increased risk of violence, and really ushering in some very harmful digital surveillance technologies at the border. So it's really confirmation that instead of an evidence-based, future-proof policy, the EU is settled on simply rubber stamping trialled and failed approaches.
But some communities on the front line of migration, as it were, might say that they're not being given the resources to deal with the influx of people. Do they have a point?
I think indeed in terms of the countries on first arrival, they have been, in terms of the European 27 states together in a united bloc with a common policy, there is a sense that the issue of migration hasn't been dealt with fairly across those EU 27. And there has been a real push to reach a compromise on a common agreement. But in our view, this has really been a lowering of standards to the lowest common acceptable standard, and a compromise which has come at the cost of human rights. For years, Europe has been trying to reform its asylum policies. And this pact, unfortunately, the agreement we have, for our view, it's not going to solve the situation of those states who are receiving more migrants, because we're going to see more detention there, more destitution, more people stranded, fewer legal protections, and also a lot more people being deported to countries maybe which they just transited, or they don't have any links or speak the language. And while these standards are low, the Pact even allows member states to suspend them for what they see as a crisis, a very loosely defined term in the Pact. As Amnesty International, we have seen how these types of policies of crises were used by Latvia and Lithuania in 2001, states of emergency which blocked access to the border for NGOs, for media, and we saw a lot of suffering and even deaths of people at the border. And these exceptional measures are still in place. So in our view, it's not going to solve that common approach, that fair sharing, and also that addressing humanitarian needs.
Well, given all that you say then, what is the solution in your view?
In our view, we would really like to see Europe setting a better standard. Let's not forget this is 27 countries in a region which can come together, can agree on a system, we believe, which is fair, which is effective, coherent. First thing we'd want to see would be that when people first arrive in Europe, and that they get urgent support, they have a roof over their heads, they have a place to feel safe, they have a fair hearing of their asylum claim. We see many countries across Europe actually moving away from the use of detention for migration. Countries like Ireland, for instance, don't detain migrant children, and other member states are looking to community-based, non-custodial alternatives to detention. So there are many good practices happening across Europe, which could be part of the European approach. The second thing we want to see is accountability. When European governments ignore EU and international law, we need a clear and effective EU response. For example, on violence and abuses at the border. Third thing we'd really want to see would be a European search and rescue capacity, so fewer lives are lost at sea, and also safe pathways so that people have an alternative, dignified and fair way to come to Europe to seek opportunity.
How easy
Europe
is
needs
it, sorry, forgive me for interrupting there, I mean, how easy
Yeah.
is it to forget then in all of this that we're talking about human beings here, many of whom have already suffered terrible experiences on their journeys?
Indeed. I mean, Europe really needs to recognise that people move. Some people move for safety, and some people move to seek better opportunity, jobs, join family, study, many reasons. And we should know as Europe and our own history of migration too, that we want to treat others how we would want to be treated. And there's really time for, I think, an evidence-based migration policy in the long term. There's some other real concerns on this pact, issues like on the digital surveillance technologies which are being used now as part of Europe's migration response, really normalising digital surveillance at and within the borders. And we know, from our experience as Amnesty and many digital rights groups have also expressed concerns, these types of policies won't just stop at the border, and they will soon also be leveraged across Europe. And the other point is on border procedures that have been agreed in this pact. There's a creation of a legal fiction, let's call it, of non-arrival, so that people can be on European territory but not given any of the rights or protections that they would have. So these types of measures, we see it as a kind of downgrading for human rights across Europe, and also Europe sending a very worrying signal to other parts of the world who are, taking far more refugees than Europe is. Europe takes a very small percentage. So we think it's a dangerous sign also worldwide.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. But Eve Geddie, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.